Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Jarek Defiler, the Patient Gamer, here to talk about the fun yet frustrating Noita. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, probably not. Noita. 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 It's Finnish, sue me. Hell comma. Developed and published by Nolla Games, or is it Noia? I don't fucking know. Noita is a pixel graphics 2D roguelite with a heavy emphasis on physics given its fallen sand architecture. What is a fallen sand game? Well, that is a rather obscure genre of two-dimensional games that focus on particle physics that will affect other particles or pixels in the game that can create chain reactions which may or may not lead to devastating consequences. Ugh. Noita takes that genre to heart, with the game revolving around the player having to traverse a hostile dungeon not only because of its enemies, but also its environment. I'm going to cut to the chase here. This game hates you. Everything in it, including yourself, is out to kill you. In Noita, you are a sorcerer delving into a deadly dungeon in order to... You know what? I don't really know. I'm sure there's a story here, as there often is with roguelites, but generally they tend to be subtle, convoluted, or underneath the surface, if you will. You often have to search the story out rather than have it told to you. Showing rather than telling. A la Risk of Rain 2, if you feel me. Noita is no different, as the main attraction of the game is the gameplay itself. A horrific 2D platforming hellscape of violence, destruction, and copious amounts of acid. Like, tons and tons of acid. Let me be clear, Noita is not for everyone. This game is ruthless. It is designed to kill you every chance it gets. Even when you're not playing and the game is closed and your computer is shut down, it will still find some way to kill you. That is the nature of Noita. You will cringe, you will scream, you will slam your fist on your desk, shout to the heavens with a bellowing cry saying, "What the f***?" Because Noira doesn't care about your feelings, your sanity, your mental well-being, or your propensity to urinate yourself in stressful situations. Nope, this game is a demon to be expelled, a black sheep to be butchered, and a game that will have you coming back again and again to further torture yourself. For that is the lot of Noira. So how does this thing actually work? Well, as the sorcerer, you make your way into the dungeon, defeating enemies and collecting gold and loot to further increase your power. The player's attack mechanics completely revolve around wands and their spells. You got spells that drop bombs to help clear up paths for you. You have some that shoot firebolts or streams of arcane damage that bounce around, perforating your enemies. You got wands that shoot saw blades that, more often than not, will just kill you. You got some spells that spit out these like jellyfish-looking things that will seek out enemies, and much, much more. Each wand you collect will have different stats on it and spell slots that allow you to configure it as you wish, and this is where the game tends to get fairly complex. There is a plethora of spells that you can find. I'm about 14 hours in and I've barely scratched the surface. There is a ton of things to discover and unlock here. It's actually quite impressive. However, this is also a part of the criticism I have for the game that I will go over a little later. But back to the wands. Some wands might have a super fast cast speed, which allows you to basically turn it into a machine gun, while others might be slower to cast but have extra mana bonuses and spell slots, allowing you to create a massive heavy-hitting behemoth that one-shots everything, including yourself. There's so many options and so many combos you can do. I'm sure a lot of people will love this tinkering mechanic, as it really allows your imagination to run wild. The game also boasts a fairly unique stain system. This is linked to its environmental factor, but you can also obtain stains through using potions. So what is a stain? Well, a stain is basically a status effect that comes about when you expose yourself to some sort of element. Having this stain on you will give you different status effects depending on the stain. For instance, bloodstains will protect you from fire while increasing your critical hit chance, whereas oil will make you more flammable and super slippery, so it's good for going down slopes really fast. Water will also protect you from fire, as will slime, but slime will also slow your movement, and toxic will protect you from fire while eating away at your health. And there's a ton more that do far more interesting and sometimes annoying things. But what is it all for anyways? Well, to kill stuff. Enemies are very diverse and quite difficult, even in the beginning areas of the dungeon. You have rats that hop around you, these wisp things that shoot icicles, and then when they die or are hit, they emit this lethal like ice bubble sheet that kills you hella fast. You also got these mystical lightning dudes that shoot out electric orbs that stun lock you and make you hate life. There's no shortage of unique enemy types, and mostly I'd say they're pretty interesting to fight and always keep you on your toes. That is, when they aren't completely gangbanging you in an orgy of bullets and spells that grant you little to no chance of survival given all the status effects going off at once, completely blinding you and giving you a seizure. Once your hand is gently removed from the middle of your monitor and you clean up all the blood from your keyboard, you will often find yourself thinking, what could I have done there to not get my ass kicked? As you click that new game button once again and the cycle continues. So yes, combat can be very frustrating. However, I would chalk a lot of this up to quite frankly janky hitbox registration and a major issue with the pixel physics in the game, which I will also go over a little later. That said, the combat is very responsive, fluid, and quite fun, albeit flawed. In regard to the hitbox issue, there will be many times where your attacks will simply go through the enemy. This is most prominent when they are within melee range or just on top of you, really. Oftentimes you won't be able to see it due to the game's pixel graphic nature, but when you are within melee range of an enemy, your wand may actually go through or past them, which makes all your attacks miss. Is this a flaw of the game, or a flaw in the player's awareness? Given that it's very hard to tell because pixel graphics are very messy, I think it may be an issue with the game, but I'll leave that to each individual player. Most combat deaths in the game are an issue of simply getting good, but you will actually find yourself dying perhaps more from the environment than the actual combat. Sure, the combat might be the impetus for you jumping off a ledge while on fire into an unforeseen lake of flammable acid, but at the end of the day, the acid is what kills you, or the fire, or the explosive crates and ice bubbles. Yeah. As said before, Noita is very, very unforgiving, and this wouldn't bother me as much if it felt fair. However, a lot of times it doesn't, and I think this is mainly due to my biggest criticism of the game, lack of giving information to the player. This is definitely a wiki game. In order for you to succeed in an optimal run, you're going to need to do some deep diving into the game's wiki. Some might not have a problem with this. I don't mind games having massive amounts of information, in fact I prefer it, but when you have to rely on third-party sources for that information, I think you fail the player on some level. In the case of Noita, there is simply so much going on and so much to learn that the game does a disservice not to give the player some modicum of information at least to get them started. And this lack of information often leads to frustration due to inconsistencies in the game. You will have so many deaths where you will have no idea how you actually died. Some spells you use can kill you, others won't. Some environmental elements slaughter your soul, others don't. Here's an example. When it comes to deadly things like acid or ice bubbles, they have similar textures and colors to other non-lethal assets in the game. When I first died from acid, I had killed a green blob monster and they dropped acid on the ground upon death. Not knowing what acid did or was, I walked into it, and because I was low on health already, I died soon after as acid burns you down to 1 HP. Okay, no problem, lesson learned. Don't step in the green shit. However, the acid in the game is the exact same color and texture type as grass. So for like the next 2 hours of gameplay, I was avoiding all these grass patches because I thought they were acid pools. What a moron, right? Or maybe the game was just a bit inconsistent in getting its message across when it comes to acid. Same thing happened with the ice bubbles. There were areas that had just water bubbles floating around and they didn't do any damage to you whatsoever. But then I would fight these ice monsters who would fart out bubbles, and given that they looked just like any other, I thought I was fine, only to find myself at the death screen some few seconds later. One more example was me avoiding these green gas chambers because I thought it was acid gas that would kill me because I'd gotten killed by acid clouds before and they all looked the same. However, I eventually broke into one, spreading the gas throughout the tunnel, and finding that, although it was flammable, it had no effect on me whatsoever. I was avoiding it for so long for no reason. Somewhat annoying, especially when there's wand or potion pedestals inside one of them. So these inconsistencies tend to pop up a lot in the game, but are they deal breakers? Well, I'd say no, because eventually you will learn to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's just that it would be a lot better for the player if the game would show you that, rather than just forcing you to learn by trial and error over and over again, as it feels like a waste of time. A simple texture change on most things can pull this off, or even just a color change, but there's a lot of issues like that and it's fairly frustrating. Most of the time I treat combat slow and methodical, taking on one enemy at a time if I can. But when you're inevitably involved in extremely fast-paced combat, which does happen, you don't really have the time to stop taking your surroundings and try to guess what's what. You shouldn't have to spam pause every fight to create a tactic, right? And it all comes down to failing to properly give consistent information to the player, in my opinion. So, as I said, many things will kill you and you'll have no idea why. Same can be said with the game's itemization mechanics. There are so many spells in the game, which is awesome, but often when given the chance to purchase them, the descriptions are very vague and you can't get the detailed stats on them until after you buy them. Only then can you see and experiment with what they actually do. It's like the game expects you to already know the literally hundreds of spells it has. Now, it's normal to unlock things in roguelites that you're not familiar with, but when it's something that can completely break your build and costs a fortune, it would be nice to be able to know what you're actually purchasing before you do. That's all I'm saying. But again, not a deal breaker, just a bit irritating. That said, the game does have an item archive and bestiary that you can access in-game at any time, so when you actually do unlock something, you can take a gander at it and use that for future reference. Okay, so back to my criticisms with the game's physics. First off, it's a cool idea. I really like what they were going for, and I think they mostly succeeded. However, there are major issues that come with having a 2D pixel graphic game where every pixel and particle count. In Noita, I have died probably more from displaced or nearly invisible pixels and particles than anything else. When you blow up an area, or God forbid shoot some ice sheet in the frozen biome, the destruction tends to leave traces of debris behind due to the physics. Cool in theory, but when you find yourself unable to move because you are stuck on a speck of a dirt clod or pebble, you will die real quick. And it feels bad, man. Dying to your own wands, to enemies or environmental factors, sure, that's your fault. Annoying sometimes depending on the circumstance, but most of the time, again, it's your fault. However, I don't think I can recall a single time where dying from being stuck on a pixel was my fault. Because for one, you can't even see them most of the time. I play in 2K on a 27-inch monitor and I can't see crap when it comes to a single speck of debris. You will be hot in the throes of battle, flying and jumping all over the place, dodging bullets and juking acid spit, only to suddenly stop dead in your tracks midair and having no idea what is happening. Most of the time I think the game just glitches because you can't see the offending pixels or particles because your character's model actually covers them. So you have no idea what's going on, and by the time you figure it out, you're dead. Fun stuff. This really is a detriment to the physics engine. If they would maybe maximize the debris to be a few pixels larger so you can actually see them, it would be fine. But as it is now, there are so many times where you get stuck on these nearly invisible leftovers that more often than not result in your death. Nothing more frustrating than that, as it's not really the player's fault in this case. So keep that in mind if you do decide to play Nolla. So yeah, what are my final thoughts? Can I recommend Nolla? Well, here I have to give a side thumb. I think the game is a fairly enjoyable romp with very innovative mechanics and ingenuity, and I do think it may be worth a lot of patient gamers' time. However, I would consider it fairly niche. This is not an everyman's game. This is an unforgiving, brutal, merciless slaughterfest that often finds you in the ground rather than your enemies. But, like any roguelite, you persevere, get up, dust yourself off, and keep on moving. No one else is going to unlock those spells for you. So, depending on the type of player you are and your stoicism and patience, Noita might just be right for you. And like always, here is a snippet from the game's amazing soundtrack, duly composed by Finnish psychedelic fusion rock band from Grotto and composer Noita. This piece is called Happy Nature Boy. Enjoy and thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to your favorite patient gamer. You all have a good morning, afternoon, evening, and night depending on where you are. This has been Jarek Defiler, the Masochist, signing off.